Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Well, you're coming in, and before we introduce our guest, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own and, however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Just a couple of notes. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions during the chat box. And our presenter has agreed to answer those queries during the presentation if they apply to what we're talking about then. And then we also have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. We'll try to answer as many as we can today. If we're not able to get to your question during today's event, go ahead and leave your contact information as well. We'll make sure someone reaches out to you afterwards to make sure that that question is addressed. Again, we want this experience to be as educational as possible. Don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Brenda Bridgers is a financial advisor, mediator, certified divorce financial analyst, retirement income certified professional, and certified divorce coach. She is also the founder of Bridging Divorce Solutions, which helps couples divorce by implementing a non-adversarial process, one that is not financially confusing and not unreasonably costly. Using alternative dispute resolution instead of, or in addition to, the court system means families can own their decisions and design their lives during and after divorce. Brenda and her team believe in changing the unknowns of divorce to an understandable and streamlined process, morphing fear into hope and questions into confidence. And Brenda, I'm really excited to have you here. I'm going to turn over the time to you.
Thank you, Marche. First, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a really hard thing to talk about. And I appreciate you so much that you are learning and getting educated about your options during this process. Let me share a little bit with you about how I came to be here. And I still get teary about this, so excuse me for it. It was March of 2014. My husband had lost his job and had been not working for about a year, actually a little bit more. When that happened, I was, raising 3 teenagers. I was volunteering. I was teaching yoga. I was a stay-at-home mom who was really, really active. And I looked around and went, teaching yoga will not put children through college. I was probably wrong about that, but that was my thinking at the time. And, it doesn't have healthcare and all the things. So it was my turn to step up and step into a more maybe reliable professional job. So I became a financial advisor, which was not my dream job, but it seemed like practical choice at the time. And then, fast forward to March of 2014, and I was working away at my computer before I went to play tennis one morning, which was like the last hold I had on my prior life. And then, of course, afterwards, I would get dressed, put on my little suit and go to work. And, squeezing in a little work before I went. What happened was my husband came in, then husband, and he had gone to Starbucks, and he, came in with his coffee, and he leaned against our kitchen counter, and he said, I want out. There's no glue, and I'm not going to do therapy. It doesn't work. And, I just went out. I was going to write you a letter, but, I thought I'd tell you. And I was so taken aback. I did not have the best marriage, because good marriages don't end in divorce, but I was unaware, and then started down this path of divorce where I just felt like I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know what my choices were. It was like being on a runaway train and getting swept along. So we ended up having one of those really expensive, lengthy, damaging divorces. Worst of all, it was really damaging to my children. And if I could take that back, I would. And I'm not here because I did divorce wonderfully. I didn't. But I did go through a divorce that had a lot of mistakes that could have been avoided. And that led me to getting all those initials that Marche talked about. So I became a student of divorce to try to help make it better for other people who are facing the same thing. At least know their options and pick the right path for them. So what we've put together today is really kind of an intro to the things to consider when you're faced with divorce at the very beginning, because they will shape the end and they will shape your life as you move forward. One of the things that I talk about, and yes, I am a financial advisor, but remember, I was teaching yoga before. So I come at this perhaps differently. I'm not all spreadsheets. I really think it's important that you look at your mindset. There are books out there that say, divorce is a business and divorce is all financial. Those are a lot of the decisions, right? It's family and it's financial. But it's not only financial. Like, we are emotional creatures, and divorce is a very emotional time. Whether you're the one who wants the divorce or whether it's your spouse. So I encourage people to really try to get as centered as you can, get as much support as you can. Whether, again, you're the one who has wanted this divorce, or whether you, like me, were sitting at your table one morning and went, holy shit, what just happened? Hope that's okay that I said that, because that's how I felt. So know a few things as you're approaching this. Typically, the person who wants the divorce has been thinking about it for a long time. Usually it's 2 years. Some people say up to 6. Like I said, no good marriage suddenly ends in divorce. So there's a runway for one party. The other party is not on the same page. They might be. I've only encountered it a couple of times. Usually someone is further down the road in their thinking and process. And they've had time to kind of understand the idea of it, maybe investigate their options. And then one party is catching up. They might have been surprised. So you have to take that into account as you go through the process, that you're not going to be in the same place on the same page from the get-go. So from a mindset point of view, whichever you are, the one who asked for the divorce or the one who received that information, try to keep in mind that there's a big difference in that time span. There's a gap that you're dealing with, and it will take time for the person who wasn't ready or expecting the divorce to catch up with that. And I just suggest that you realize it and allow it. It's also really important, I believe, to work through what you're feeling at the time. My personal mistake right out of the box was, I'm gonna get through this. I'm gonna make a checklist and I'm gonna do all the things, and I'm gonna do this right. And you can't checklist it. It's got a life of its own. But what you can do is be in touch with how you feel now and what you want your life to look like later. And that's really important. If you're centered on your goals, then you're much less likely to get bogged down in a fight or minutia or things that become way more important than they are as you go through the process. And then the last thing in the mindset is really try to get help from professionals that match you, and take the time to research and learn about the processes that are available to you. cannot tell you the number of times people have told me, gee, I wish I knew I had that choice. Or boy, I wish I'd met you 5 years ago. There are a lot of people out there who can support you. And one of the things I think is tremendously important, make sure you have a team that you feel has your back. You're making decisions that will last the rest of your life. So if you're uncomfortable with any one of the professionals you're working with, then look for another professional who can really support and guide you as you go through this process. So other things, I mentioned a little bit about goals-based, future-based. Really try to check in with whether you're being the person that you want to be as you move through this process. Now, it's not always possible. It's very emotional, or it can be. But if you make a conscious effort to try to take actions so that you know when you look back in a year, 2 years, 10 years, that you can go, I did the best I could. I'm proud of how I act. I tried to take a long-term viewpoint rather than being caught in the short term. And that's what will benefit you, your kids, if you have them, and yes, your ex, as you move forward in life, especially if you have children, you're linked really forever in some way. So taking that long-term goal-oriented point of view can really benefit you. It can also save you time and money and anxiety as you move through this really stressful process. Kind of covered that.
Brenda, I just wanted to interject here. We did have a question. Even the question is about dealing with those negative emotions, like wanting revenge and anger and things like that. What's the best way that you've seen that people have worked through those so that they can behave in a way that is like what you've suggested?
I think it's really a time to find your right support systems. They're out there in a lot of different ways. So it might be as removed as listening to podcasts that help with a positive mindset. There are a lot of them out there, not necessarily all on divorce. You might want to listen to things that are about meditations, about finding grace, about, I guess you need to be in touch with what your need is. So it can be as like simple and accessible as that, or you might want to look for professionals who are trained in helping you with the different segments of what you're going through. For example, a therapist who is trained in working through the mental health and emotional issues that you're facing as you go through the process. One thing I often see is that people inadvertently use their attorney as a therapist. And I would caution against that. Like, they are absolutely necessary. Their expertise is the law. And their hourly rates are, let's face it, higher than any of the other professionals involved. So you might want to work with a divorce coach, because their job is to help you walk down the path of what life looks like later and make good decisions about your process, about your family, about what's real, like working through what's really important to you, rather than staying on the top line, revenge, anger. And I'm not saying that being angry, being hurt, being depressed, being vengeful aren't part of this process. They certainly can be, especially if there have been some, what shall we say, situations that weren't that. But realizing that in the end, the only person that is being hurt, or it's not the only person, the person who is being hurt the most is you when you're holding on to that. So looking for a professional that understands what you're going through and can help you work and recognize to get out of it. Neuro-Linguistic Programming is something that really works for people. EMDR, which is, I don't know, it's a mode of therapy that helps you process negative emotions. And I'm so simplifying that because I'm not a therapist. But there are a lot of modalities that are available to you. I guess my biggest answer there is don't try to do it on your own. You need a team. A lot of times people try to budget their way through divorce. You know, I'm just going to give all my money to my attorney because I can't afford other professionals, without realizing that getting the appropriate help in other places can save you a ton of money by using the right person to support you in the right way. There are also a lot of support groups out there. Divorce Care is one I'm aware of. I'm sure there are many others. If you have a religious affiliation, you can look to that. The bottom line, long-winded answer I just gave is look outside and get the support you need. And I'm going to flip it and say, try to recognize, because divorce also can bring out, I knew an attorney once that called it the Greek choir. It can bring out the like, oh, I never thought that would happen. What happened to you? It's kind of intrigue, and people want the dirt and the smut and the stories, and they kind of get excited about it, or really egg people on, like, oh, tell me more. What happened there? If you find yourself in that circle or in that situation, try to remove yourself, because it's not a healthy place to be. Like, it might feel good in the moment, but really you're in that negative space, staying in a negative space. And I would also always, counsel people, and myself included, just try to aspire to the next level up. Not like saying, I feel so vengeful, I am just angry and murderous, so I need to try for forgiveness. That's way too big a leap. Maybe you just need to try the next level up. So if I had a scale of emotions right now, I could tell you, but it might just be from vengeful to angry. I'm still mad, but I'm not trying to get even, that kind of thing. Just keep trying to step up and get the support around you that's positive. And when I said you're the only one you're hurting by holding on to that anger, it's not true, because if you have kids, they're being hurt for sure by being surrounded by that.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And I do want to tell attendees, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. I'm sure we'll have some more.
Okay, before you file, and I feel this is really important. Now, this is not to say if you've already filed that don't listen or this doesn't count. But if you haven't, I think it's best to get educated first, make some choices first, and then pick the best direction for you. So you want to know what your options are. And there are different modalities of divorce we're going to go through. So those are the types of divorces that are available. You want to make sure you're matching the type of divorce you pick with the professionals you pick. For example, if you out of the gate hire a litigator who loves to go to court, but what you're really looking for and could have used is someone who likes, we call them settlement minded. That's a mismatch from the get-go. And that usually ends up escalating the cost and the time and the animosity. So if you don't match what you want your divorce to look like with a professional who will support you in that, it can go south really fast. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what your options are. And know that there are hybrids even within this. Remember, it's your life. It's your divorce, right? You get to pick. You select the process that best suits you and use that to move forward. I would also suggest that if you're not sure, you pick the least contentious process to start, because you can always step it up, right? So if you try mediation because you think it might work and it ends up not working, you can move to litigation. But if you start with litigation, it is very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. So let's talk about what the different ones are. We have litigation, mediation, collaboration, and pro se. So litigation, is what we as a culture, as a society, are most familiar with. And that is each side gets an attorney. That attorney is an advocate for their party, their person that they're representing. And their job is to zealously represent them under the eyes of the law to the best of their ability. So right from the get-go, you're starting out with two sides because that's the way it's built. Interestingly, and I kind of still have trouble stomaching this, divorce is basically slapping a criminal proceeding on an emotional relationship. It's a legal relationship. But the process of going through the court system, the courts were built basically to take care of civil disputes. So if you're not in a place where you need that, then you have much more control if you stay out of it. Litigation, excuse me, litigation is court-based. So the professionals that are involved in litigation, always attorneys, right? And each party must have their own. As a conflict of interest for one attorney to represent two people, they can't do it. A CDFA might be involved. So that's a certified divorce financial analyst. Excuse me, I'm gonna have a drink because I'm getting caught in mouth because I'm talking so much. Okay, so what a CDFA is someone who is trained in the finance of divorce. The finance of divorce is very different than a retirement planner or a financial advisor because they're crossing over what they know of the laws and obligations of the state with the finances. And what our job as we work as a CDFA is to like bring that specialty to supporting people in making decisions. And so I guess I'll give an example here. I frequently run into people who have gone down the litigation route and they might be several months in and they have not talked about finances. Most of the decisions that are being made in divorce, I say it over and over again, are family and financial. They are not legal. It's a legal process. But the decisions you're making are about your family and your finances. How are you going to divide things? Is there going to be support? What is allowable in your state? What is reasonable to expect? So these are all things that an attorney might not be looking at the same way as a financial advisor is. So as a CDFA, what I'm looking at is not only like, how are you dividing the pie now in your divorce, but what is your life going to look like 5-10 years down the line? And is it supportable? Is it tenable? If there's support involved, is someone actually going to be able to pay the support? Because if that's not part of the equation, then you're just going to end back in court and spending more money and probably angrier. So we're looking at things from is it a reasonable executable agreement or settlement? And also, are there any things that you might agree to in theory that can't be executed? So I've run across where there's an agreement to divide a pension, but no one checked to make sure the pension could be divided until after the settlement when they tried to put it in force and it couldn't happen. And then the agreement is done, it's a contract. And in order to break that, that's why you hear of not necessarily pensions, but when people end up back in court, it's either a financial or a family issue that they're back in court over. What we're trying to do is make sure you have all the information you need to avoid that and have a sustainable, realistic agreement. Guardian Ad Litem is someone who, if parents are having trouble even before the divorce co-parenting and figuring out what they want that to look like, or there might be things like parental alienation going on, a guardian ad litem comes in, they're going to work, they're appointed by the court, they're going to work with the child and knowing the child, and they're going to kind of step in and represent them as to what they think is in the best interest of the child. Sometimes what happens in that case is one parent who is a proponent of bringing in the guardian ad litem thinks that, oh, they're going to see exactly what I see and they're going to, side with me, but they might not. And then you've given the decision-making ability over to this person, the court, and what their interpretation is of your family situation. Now, sometimes it's absolutely necessary, especially if there's danger of harm. But sometimes they're used as kind of a, what's the word I'm searching for?
People are thinking they want to be a surrogate.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I was trying to help you with that word there. Maybe like,
yeah, I mean, sometimes use as a, I'm coming up with a ploy, but I didn't want to use that, but I'm using it just, I'll get my way, but you really have to be okay with turning over the decision-making for that child to the guardian ad litem. So it's not something to be taken lightly.
We did have a question here. Is the guardian ad litem appointed by the court, or do you choose that person?
You can agree to that person, and I am not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. So I cannot say in your jurisdiction how it's done, who they are. I can only say in my experience, appointed by the court, but parents can have some say. And yes, I agree to this person being the guardian ad litem, but that might not be the case. And back to the whole point of getting educated, that's also something that is really, really important. If you have, you live in Washington, D.C., and you have a cousin who got divorced in Chicago and you're going to them for advice, that advice might not be sound because rules vary dramatically, state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you have to make sure you know what the rules are in your community, in your court system, because that is what will apply to you. And if you go the route of litigation, you are bound under those laws. If you pick one of the other modalities, then you have more flexibility in making your decisions. If that makes sense. The last thing on litigation, a certified divorce coach. Think of a divorce coach as both a thought partner. So they're going to help work through what is meaningful in your settlement and what is not, or in your process. Like, really be goal oriented and what you're looking for. So an example might be if someone has been, say, out of the workforce for quite some time. As part of their settlement, they might say, hey, I want this amount of money to live on forever. Well, given the laws in our world, that is probably not likely. So what a divorce coach might help them work through is, well, what do you want to do next? What do you want your life to look like next? What are the steps you need to take to get there? And it might end up that someone says, I always wanted to be a nurse. I want to go back to school. Then I won't be self-sufficient, but it will cost this much. And then those are productive conversations that you can have as you're going through your settlement discussions. And they're goal-based, non-positional. The other role of the divorce coach is kind of being a business manager for the divorce process. So if you have someone who is doing the scheduling, the note-taking, and this applies somewhat more in other modalities, but if you have someone who is helping you schedule the process and make sure you're moving forward, or make sure you're staying within budget instead of being surprised by a $10,000 bill from an attorney at the end of the month that you can't pay and you're dipping into your 401k, and so on and so on. So a divorce coach can help you have reasonable expectations, but also support you in role playing, like, what do you really want and how do you want to ask for it? And, the question about, what if you feel vengeful? It's okay, feel vengeful, but a divorce coach can also help you funnel that somewhere that's going to be more productive for you. Okay, next modality is mediation. So mediation is a neutral party. So I say they're on both sides. Like, often mediators will go, I'm not on anybody's side. And then, yes, that's true. They're neutral. We, by definition, as a mediator, have to be neutral. But I'm on both sides. So I want to help both people come to an agreement that best supports them moving forward with their lives as a mediator. So they're not there, nor should they be, to make your decisions. But a mediator, a good mediator, should be there to help you deal with things that are based in conflict that you haven't been able to resolve yourself, and help assist the discussions, maybe present other options or help you brainstorm options that you can both agree upon, so you don't become contentious and so you don't end up fighting over things in court that maybe if you had the proper support, you wouldn't. Now, it doesn't always work, but more often than not, it does, in my experience. With mediation, it is, and this might be on the next slide, but I'll just keep talking. Mediation is a private, as opposed to litigation, where everything that's on file with court is public. In mediation, your decisions are your decisions. They're kept private. So kids aren't going to be reading them in court documents if they get curious when they're in their 20s or things like that. A mediator can be a mental health professional, a financial advisor, a certified divorce coach, an attorney. What a mediator has done is been trained in alternative dispute resolution and how to help parties walk through their issues and hopefully come up with a solution that meets both of their goals to a degree. Now, do know that there are different types of mediation. I've seen different ones in different jurisdictions or states. So what I basically practice is a transformational mediation. So what that means is we're sitting usually around the same table, or if it's remote, in the same Zoom call. And we're having the hard discussions about the things that are creating an impasse or a roadblock, and trying to come out on the other side. It's not let's make a deal. There are types of mediation where different parties are in different rooms with their attorneys, and the mediator is going back and forth between the rooms. And this is more a business style mediation, but it exists. And it's basically, here's an offer. Do you accept it? Here's the counter offer. And they go back to the other party. Here's the counter offer. Do you accept it? Here's the counter offer. It is more of a negotiation than a mediation in my point of view. So if mediation is something that you would elect, I would say find out what kind of mediation is being practiced and try to make sure it matches your expectations and needs. Sometimes people are better off in different rooms. If they can't stand the sight of their spouse, but they don't want to go to court, that might be the best modality for you. If you want to be able to sit at the same table and have those discussions about, assets and holidays and so on, they tend to be durable agreements because there's nothing lost in translation, or very little lost in translation compared to the back and forth where both parties aren't talking face to face. An important point is you can use more than one mediator. There have been cases where I've been a financial mediator and a mental health professional has been the mediator that helps through the parenting plan and other agreements that you need to come to. So you can team the mediation, and that's back to using the right professional in the right way. And then we have, I believe, collaborative divorce is next. So collaborative is a process that started, I believe, in the 1990s, and it's based on alternative dispute resolution. And this is kind of a hybrid between mediation and litigation. So what this is basically you have a team. They're trained to all work together. And you and your attorney, your spouse and their attorney, as well as a divorce coach and a financial neutral, there can be one or two divorce coaches. Other professionals might come in if need be, but it's a goal-based process. It's an out-of-court and private process, and you're sitting at the same table making the decisions. What this eliminates is kind of the game of telephone. So if you're negotiating your divorce and I am, and I go to my attorney and I explain my thoughts or position on something. And then that attorney calls the other attorney, and then their attorney goes to your spouse, and so on. There's a lot of back and forth there, and things can get lost in translation. You're also paying for all that time as things are being communicated and translated. Sometimes there's what I believe is a misconception that, oh my gosh, having all those people around the table who are professionals, who are being paid in a collaborative divorce is going to cost way more. But usually, and not always, because nothing is ever always, usually when you're in that scenario or in that situation, you're actually able to cut to the chase of what's being decided much more quickly. And a collaborative divorce might be more appropriate than a mediation if there's an imbalance. So maybe one person has a very strong personality and the other person is used to going along with their spouse, and that dynamic has been set up through the entire marriage. If that's the case and you go into mediation, it might be really hard to come to a more equitable agreement. There might be an imbalance there. In collaboration, since each party has their own attorney, and that attorney is bound to look out for their client's interest, but they're all talking at the same time about the things that they need to decide based on their goals, you can, again, come up with a more durable agreement, less likely to end up back in court and litigation, and more likely to iron out the things during your divorce process than down the road when something might pop up that's, oh my gosh, we never even talked about that. And again, back in court. What we're trying to avoid through this whole thing is both back in court and a lot of animosity, expense, contentious, not setting up people for having a good next phase of your life. So collaborative is a way that seems to better support that than litigation. And again, litigation, there is a place for it. And sometimes, especially in abusive situations, it's absolutely necessary, but not always. The other thing with collaborative, and I think this can go for any divorce, it allows you to budget your divorce. You can say, we're going to have one team meeting a month because that's what our budget allows, instead of turning it over to a process or the court system where you're not in charge of your schedule or your decisions or what you're spending. Okay, and then the last is pro se. This is also called DIY or kitchen table divorce. I highly recommend this if you haven't been married long, you don't have shared assets, you don't have children, you don't own a house. If it's a very simple legal proceeding, and if it's allowable in your state, every state again has different rules and waiting periods, and you really kind of need to know the statutes or the rules. You don't have to become an attorney, obviously. All you're doing in this case is dissolving the contract of marriage. You don't need to spend $10,000 if you're not looking at support, you're not looking at alimony or child support, there are no assets to divide. It might make perfect sense to do a do-it-yourself online divorce because there's not that much really to discuss or fight over, and to pay those fees is ungainly. Now, there are a lot of cases where if you do have children, you own a home together and so on, it's not appropriate, and perhaps the state doesn't allow it. And then let's just talk about a few of the mistakes. So from the get-go, we talked about not investing in the right professionals. You get better support and it's more cost effective, I believe, to use the right people for the right things. To not use your attorney as a therapist, to not use your therapist as a financial advisor, just to be aware of there are people who have trained specifically in their area of expertise. They're more likely to do it more efficiently and less likely to have errors than using someone who that's not their their area of expertise. I've run into too many times where an agreement was drafted, a settlement agreement or marital dissolution agreement was drafted only by an attorney, and there were complicated financial implications, sometimes tax implications, especially if the business is involved, sometimes not valuing a business correctly, sometimes not knowing or looking into how a pension could be divided, and on and on and on. But it's not because they're not wonderful at what they do. It was because these were really specific situations, especially as things become more complicated with maybe stock options or restricted stock units, or I keep coming back to pensions because those are very tricky ones. Sometimes they just cannot be divided the way that the agreement says they can. And then it's very troublesome because there are times when nothing can be done about that.
Interesting. I do have some questions coming up, but I'm going to go ahead and hold them because we have that question and answer period coming up.
Okay, I'll hop to it here. Common mistakes. Thinking you got to lawyer up and go to court and that's the only way you can divorce. It's not the case. Most of the people I work with, not all, because I do work with litigation, but most are out of court where they're making their own decisions. It's private. It can be painful, but it's much less so. So you don't have to do, like, I'm going to age myself here, the Knots Landing version of divorce. What would I don't know what a current day example would be because I don't watch that much TV. Well, Divorce Story, I guess, right? It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be, okay, I want a divorce. I'm going to file. You are served. Here is our process. Might be right for you, but it might not. So just knowing that, again, your marriage, your divorce, you own it and you can make it look like you want it to look. It doesn't have to be what we have allowed our society to, oh, you must hate each other and you want to, take them to the cleaners. Just doesn't have to be that way. A lot of times people get positional, and it's not just the fair or equal mindset, it's the I want more. So if someone is looking at divorce like, okay, here's our pie, it's 100%, and I want 52% because I want more. When you're positional like that, you're likely to spend way more than that extra 2% you want on legal fees and animosity, because there's a cost to that, and stress and anxiety, than looking at things from okay, how do we want to part with respect? How do we want to make sure that one party or the other is not taking more of a hit, either financially or from a family point of view, than need be? So I suggest that going in positionally, like, this is what I want and I won't sell for anything else, is a recipe for a long and expensive divorce. Going in with, okay, we are not going to be married anymore, but how do we get on with our lives as best we can and move forward, is a more positive position to take. And then the other thing is not being realistic. And we do run into this. And again, the laws are changing for support. In most states, the direction is going to more of a rehabilitative stance for any support than a here's your formula and you're going to have alimony for the rest of your life. There are people who do come into the process and think, oh, I haven't worked for 20 years, so I'm going to be supported. And that is, or tends to be, unrealistic. And what we, or I as a financial, really try to look at is what is realistic? What do you need to help you, move on and move through this? And if it's like, nope, I'm going to make him pay, and I say him because that is stereotypically how it works, but not always. I'm going to make the other party pay and support me. It often takes a long time for people to work around that position. The faster you get there, to the, I don't have to win this, I need to move on from this, the more likely you're to have a less expensive, more positive outcome. What else? So wrapping up, next phase. Again, my viewpoint, most in the litigation process, and most attorneys I know, because it's the end of their engagement, right? On that settlement day, they're pretty much done. People look at divorce as the finish line, like the day that settlement happens. It's over, that is the finish line. I look at it as the starting point, right? And what you're doing in your divorce is getting yourself to the point where you can move on with your life, right? Your marriage is over, but your life is not. You're moving forward. So it's not the end. It's the beginning of your new lifestyle. It's the beginning of the next phase of what is next for you. And if you go through your divorce, looking at that, again, in my experience, people have a much better adjustment. Often if it's like, okay, I crossed the finish line, I am now divorced, like, and now what? Because it wasn't forward focused. Next phase of your life is just as important as this one, maybe more so. Okay.
All right, we're going to go ahead and open this up to questions. I do have several that have come in, and then I would encourage our attendees to go ahead and put that in the chat as well if you have questions that come up. This is a great one. What is the best way to find the right professionals? Are there good search terms to use?
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
So I would say you're probably going to come up with a lengthy list depending on search terms. I would say, you're going to search divorce coach, divorce attorney, CDFA, things like that. You're going to search the professions to get your list. I would say look at reviews. What experience have people had with those professionals to maybe narrow down your list? I would say look at their website. If they have a blog, read the blog. Does it resonate with you? Is it something where you say, oh, they see me, they hear me, or their clients, like they come across that way? Or, do you read what they've written and go, ooh, that leaves a bad feeling in my stomach, I think the best way to find professionals that work with you is to have a conversation with those professionals. Guy, offer a discovery call. Most professionals I know do. Some might charge for it, but you can ask those questions. You basically do your due diligence online, because that's where you're going to find the professionals. You can also, if you know people who have gone through the process, talk to them about their experience with their professional team. Just be cautious there that if you're talking to them, you also kind of have an idea of what their divorce needs were. Like if they don't match yours, the professional might not match yours. But I do think you can get a really good idea of, if you ask thoughtful, guided questions when you're interviewing them, then you can see if there's a match. If your gut tells you no, it's wrong, don't do it. Everyone you talk to might say, yay, they are the best attorney, or they are the best financial advisor, or they are the best divorce coach. But if you meet with them and you feel unsupported or uninformed, or like they're not listening to you, then they're not your person. There is someone out there who is the right professional for you. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, and then if you want to go ahead and put in the comments if that was the answer that was adequate for you, let us know. Here's another one. What are the most common issues that you see that couples disagree about?
Money. Often that's what caused the divorce. Not being able to communicate clearly about money. Couples disagree about, so top 3 reasons for divorce: irreconcilable differences, which is a bucket that we in the industry or in the legal system use to try to get away from naming cause. There are still states that absolutely do. Most are moving towards, okay, you don't want to be married anymore, irreconcilable differences. Infidelity and money. Those are the things that cause divorce. Those are the things that people argue about in divorce as they go through the process. There is usually less contentious or contention about parenting. Not always, but usually around children, people are more able to come to an agreement. Around finances, it can be unrealistically positional. In other words, someone might say, I am not paying a dime. Well, when the law in the state says, here's our formula for support, the likelihood of not paying a dime is very slim. And also positional then becomes expensive because you spend a lot of money in fees. It might be how to divide assets when someone is emotionally attached to those assets. In other words, if one party has a pension and they're like, I've worked 25 years at that company, so that is my pension, mine. So key there is mine. And the other party might be legally entitled to half of that pension, but it's positional because there's an emotional attachment, right? Back to, we are emotional beings. So it's learning how to work through those emotions attached to the things. So maybe as a CDFA, we're able to come up with like, okay, you keep your pension and here's how we offset it. So it's tying the emotions to the financial decisions. I got a little off track there, but most often it's money and support, and one feeling as though they're being taken advantage of and the other feeling as though they're not getting enough.
Oh, I started talking and I didn't undo the mute button there. I have another question here. What if you're not the breadwinner and you don't have access to money to hire professionals?
That's a very good question. And that's one that I would say depends on your individual situation. And that's going to be more of a legal question. If you're not the breadwinner and you're going down the path of divorce, then an attorney can help support you in getting an interim agreement where you do have some kind of support, access to money, whatnot. And that is most likely, if it's not amenable, meaning you can't with your spouse say, okay, we're going to separate households, we're going to get divorced, let's work out the finances of it. If that's the case and you can be amenable, you can work with a CDFA to do that figuring, like what is reasonable, what will it take? If you are not the breadwinner and you don't have access to any of the information, you're probably going to go down a path of litigation if your spouse is not going to be open or sharing. And unfortunately, that's probably the most expensive route. Sometimes when people are, even when they're contentious, if people are able to say, you know, we know that the divorce is inevitable, but we don't have to do it the most expensive way. So ultimately, the financials are going to be subpoenaed, and ultimately the law of the land will prevail on how those finances are divided. Sometimes then the breadwinning spouse, you know, the earner in the family, can say, okay, I see the reason in, ultimately I'm going to have to provide this information, and ultimately we're going to split households, and ultimately whatever the rules are the rules that we're going to, within reason, end up following. Then sometimes that can be enough for them to share the information and allow a draw on income, basically. So those are generalities. That's really something I would talk to professionals about, specific to your case, to know what your options are.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. Here we go. This is a really great one. I have a couple of girlfriends who got divorced and they keep going back to court. It seems like every other year to fight over something new. how can I avoid that?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, because I can't guarantee, nor can anyone, that you can avoid that. But if you and your spouse are able to come up with an agreement, keyword agreement, that you both find equitable, you're able to execute it. Neither of you feel as though the other one has been, one wins and one loses, then you're less likely to go to court. If you use a more, what I call, durable process, mediation or collaborative process, and you try to iron out all the things during the divorce and make the settlement as thorough as possible, I believe you're less likely to go back to court. Now, no one controls that. And especially once you're divorced, you can't control your former spouse. You can only control yourself. So to be as educated and as thorough as possible, to get the right support, to get someone on your team or people, professionals on your team who are able to point out the pitfalls of an agreement, like something that a good professional, we're not going to be able to catch everything because we're human. But if we're able to look at an agreement and see some pitfalls in there, you're less likely to be back in court. If you're working with someone who is expert in saying, okay, this housing arrangement is going to cause you a capital gains tax down the road, and you're going to be fighting about it, or a pension division, or a stock option that was earned during the marriage and becomes payable later on. If you're looking at things that are let's just talk about this now so we don't have to go back to court later, they're not easy discussions. It's not an easy process. But the more thorough you can be now, the less likely you are to go back to court later.
Thank you. All right, we have one more question and then we'll have to end our webinar. I know that you could probably talk for a while, but I will tell you that we have asked Brenda to come back and speak again on a little more deeper dive about the process of divorce and also the financial aspects of divorce. And those will be on the calendar as well. Here's the last question. Can you talk a little bit about child support? I've heard that it's standard in the state. And then how long does that last?
Every state is going to have their own formula, and it is relatively standard. Courts will deviate from child support upward. They seldom seem to deviate downward, meaning, so I moved from Illinois a couple of years ago. In Illinois, you do the child support formula, but the formula is based on the entire state. Chicago and the surrounding suburbs cost a lot more to live in than downstate Illinois, but the formula is based on the whole state. So there could be cases where, in order to maintain the standard of living for the children, or something closer to it, so there's not a huge discrepancy between two households, child support might be greater, and they might agree to it being greater. A couple might. But baseline, it is a formula. The duration of child support is going to depend on your agreement. It usually ends at 18 or the end of high school, but sometimes it can go through college. And know that child support is modifiable, meaning if the financial circumstances of one or the other parent changes, you can go back and say, we're plugging new numbers into the formula essentially to modify child support. And another common misconception with child support is that it's meant to cover everything, and it's not. Child support is food, shelter, and clothing. That's what it's meant to cover. So if you have, an aspiring Olympic athlete who has lots of training costs, then the need for that child outside of food, shelter, and clothing is going to be much greater. So you need to work through in your parenting plan and your finances how you're going to look at that. And sometimes it's a big look. If someone has a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who is getting divorced, they need to come up with an agreement that is going to take into account when that 5-year-old is driving, or that 2-year-old is, taking gymnastics lessons 5 days a week, or what have you. So there is a constant, there's a constant shifting in the need, and being able to co-parent effectively through the finances and through the parenting decisions is really important, and a level of impact above and beyond child support.
Well, thank you
Make
so
sense?
much. Go ahead.
Oh, I said, did that make sense?
Yeah, I think we covered that. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions. I do want to thank Brenda for being here. And I want to thank the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. To our attendees, look for a link to a replay of this event in your email shortly. And you're welcome to rewatch it, take notes, and send it to other people who might be interested in this content and who might be in the same situation. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your questions. And our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.